I never imagined the worst day of my life would begin with a simple phone call. The morning air was still thick with the dampness of night, and my body was stubbornly reluctant to wake. I lay in bed, wrapped in the fragile cocoon of early dawn silence, the faint hum of the city outside barely cutting through the quiet. Just as my thoughts began to drift, the shrill ring of the phone pierced the stillness, sharp and intrusive. I reached out, my fingers trembling more from dread than cold as I answered. On the other end, my boss's voice came through, too calm, almost mechanical, like a cold wind brushing across a graveyard. "Zilda, we have to let you go. Effective immediately." The words hung in the air, weightless yet suffocating, as if gravity itself had shifted under me. I could feel my heart lurch violently against my ribs, each beat hammering like a warning bell in an empty church. The room around me blurred slightly, the soft morning light suddenly harsh and unforgiving against my skin. I sat there, stunned, the handset clutched loosely in my hand as the silence that followed felt heavier than any explosion. The old wooden floor beneath me creaked faintly, echoing my shaking hands. It was as if the very foundation of my life had cracked, exposing jagged edges sharp enough to cut deep into my soul. I was fired, at the worst possible moment, and every tiny sound in the room seemed to preach failure and loss. Outside the window, the world carried on obliviously. The distant roar of an engine, the rustling of untamed branches shaking in an indifferent breeze. But inside, I was trapped in a suffocating bubble of despair. My mind raced through memories of years spent working hard, sacrificing late nights and early mornings, all now reduced to a cold, final sentence delivered in a monotone. That day, I was already bearing the weight of my family's struggles. My husband, João, was silent and withdrawn these days, his furrowed brow and weary eyes speaking volumes in the spaces between our conversations. The bills stacked half-heartedly on the kitchen table like silent accusations, and the fading light in our home mirrored the growing darkness inside me. Losing my job wasn't just losing income, it was losing the thread that held us together. I could feel the floor disappear beneath my feet, as if I were standing on the edge of a bottomless pit. The walls of my room, once comforting, seemed to close in, the air thick and hard to breathe, carrying an oppressive heaviness. I pressed my forehead to the cold window pane, trying to anchor myself to something real, but the reflection that stared back was a stranger's. Eyes wide with shock, a face drained of color and hope. I had no idea then that this nightmare was only beginning, that the ripples from this one call would unsettle everything that I once believed unbreakable. The storm ahead was merciless, and I would soon have to face it, not just alone, but with my family's fragile heart in my hands. My husband, João, was my rock, or at least, that's what I thought he was. We had built our life together, painstakingly weaving 30 years of memories, challenges, and quiet victories. Our daughter, Maria, had left the nest just last year, leaving the house eerily quiet, the walls echoing with the absence of her laughter. The rooms felt heavier now, filled with shadows that seemed to stretch longer as the days passed. Lately, João's presence had shifted. He was still there, but something intangible had slipped away. His warm smiles had grown rare, replaced by a hollow distance in his eyes, like he was carrying some invisible burden that pressed down on his shoulders, but refused to share its weight. I often caught him staring out the window at nothing, his jaw clenched tight, fingers tapping nervously on the worn arm of his chair. When I tried to reach out, to hold on to the man I knew, I was met with quiet sighs and distracted eyes that drifted away before I could connect. The air in our home felt thick with unspoken fears. Financial strain gnawed at us relentlessly. The emails from bill collectors piled up like ominous shadows on the kitchen counter, their demands echoing louder than any voice in the room. Emotionally, we were wilting under stress, fragile and frayed. João and I moved around each other carefully, tipping-toeing through conversations that never quite reached the heart of our troubles. When I was fired, the fragile stability we clung to began to crumble visibly. It felt like sand slipping through our fingers, the tiny grains vanishing and leaving only emptiness in their place. My job had been more than just a paycheck. It was a lifeline, a thread holding us steady. Now, that thread was snapping. I could feel the distance between João and me growing like a vast chasm that echoed with silence instead of shared strength. Sometimes, when we sat side by side in the fading light of the evening, I'd reach for his hand, hoping to feel reassurance there. But his fingers would twitch nervously. pulling away just enough to remind me that something had shifted, something neither of us could yet name. And yet, deep beneath the noise of our worries, I held on to a stubborn hope that for the sake of our family, we would find a way to rebuild, to find that bridge across the growing gulf. The weight in the room was tangible, almost suffocating. Shadows crept along the walls as twilight settled, wrapping us in a quiet tension that churned beneath the surface. Every glance between us was heavy with things unsaid, regrets, fears, silent prayers for a future neither of us dared to speak aloud. Despite it all, I knew this was the moment that would define us, whether we would let the fractures tear us apart or find the strength to face the storm together. Days slipped by, but the silence that settled over our home grew heavier with each passing hour, thickening the air until it felt like breathing through a fog. João and I skirted around the future, our fears tucked beneath forced smiles that never quite reached our eyes. Our nights were restless, each one stretching long into shadows, leaving us drained and distant by morning. The walls around us seemed to watch silently, closing in with their cold indifference as the warmth drained from our lives. I buried myself in job applications, fingers trembling over the keyboard, praying silently for just one glimmer of hope. But at 55, every rejection landed like a blow, sharp and cruel, and each message seemed to dissolve a little more of my spirit. It was more than just the loss of income. It was a slow eroding of my self-worth, a whispering doubt creeping into my mind that maybe, at this stage in life, there was no place for me anymore. João, meanwhile, retreated further into himself. The man who once held my hand through every storm was now a ghost in the house. His shoulders stooped, his skin pale beneath the sparse light. I watched helplessly as the weight of worry carved deeper into his face, the laughter lines replaced with furrows of stress and fatigue. His once bright eyes dulled, reflecting a man fighting battles he couldn't share. Our little routines, the small anchors that had kept us tethered, disintegrated. The dinners we used to share, filled with gentle talks and shared stories, became mechanical and cold. Two strangers sitting silently across from each other, the clatter of utensils swallowed by a suffocating quiet. The silence between us was no longer comfortable. It was brittle, fragile, and threatening to shatter. Tensions, long simmering beneath the surface, finally broke through. The arguments began small, harsh words slipping out over trivial matters, but they quickly escalated, fueled by frustration, fear, and the gnawing despair we both carried. It was like watching a fire start in the smallest corner of a dry forest, spreading unpredictably, threatening to consume everything we once trusted. One night, the weight of that silence became unbearable. I found João sitting in the dim light of the living room, his hands clasped tightly as if holding on to a fragile hope. Desperate to break the walls we had built between us, I finally confronted him, my voice trembling but firm, searching for the truth buried beneath our avoidance. But instead of clarity, we met a raw, painful revelation neither of us was ready to face. In that confrontation, the frightening truth we'd both hidden came crashing through, threatening to drown us in its cold shadow. It was a moment of despair, yet also the first crack in the armor that had kept us isolated. As our voices faltered and the night grew darker, I realized that whatever came next, we could no longer run from what we feared the most. "I'm scared, Zilda," João whispered, his voice barely audible over the dull hum of the kitchen light. It was the first time in weeks I'd heard anything so real from him. No defenses, no masks, just raw, trembling vulnerability. The words hit me like a crashing wave, cold and overwhelming, yet strangely awakening. For so many years, I had always seen João as the unshakable pillar, the provider, the protector who stood tall no matter the storm. But in that moment, beneath the dim, flickering kitchen light that cast dancing shadows onto the faded wallpaper, I saw him for what he truly was, as lost, frightened, and fragile as I'd been feeling all along. The kitchen was small and cramped, filled with the faint scent of old coffee and the lingering undertone of forgotten dinners. The tile floor beneath our feet was cold, making me shift uncomfortably as we sat across from each other at the scratched wooden table. The single bulb above flickered irregularly, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to mimic the uncertainty twisting inside us both. Outside, the night pressed against the window pane, a black, silent curtain that seemed to swallow the world whole. In the stillness of that room, the weight of everything we had been holding back suddenly exploded. We began to talk, our words hesitant at first, breaking like fragile ice across a frozen lake. I confessed my fears, the pain of losing my job, the gnawing dread that I was no longer enough. Juon shared the shadows that had darkened his heart, the sense of failure, and the helplessness as he watched me crumbling. No longer hiding behind silence, we bared our souls, revealing the depths of desperation we'd kept locked away from each other. The kitchen's dim light flickered on our faces, highlighting the tears welling in our eyes, the rawness of emotions neither of us had dared to express. That night was painful and brutal, a storm of anguish and shame, but it was also the moment the invisible walls began to crack. For the first time in weeks, the distance between us felt bridged, fragile but real. Our voices, once cloaked in tension and avoidance, now trembled with tentative hope. We didn't have all the answers, nor did the path ahead seem any clearer, but we made an unspoken promise in that shadowed kitchen to face everything, no matter how dark or uncertain, together. There, in that quiet, flickering kitchen, amid broken hopes and whispered fears, a small spark ignited deep inside me. A fragile flame of hope, fragile but fiercely alive. It was the reminder that even in our darkest moments, connection can save us, and that sometimes admitting fear is the bravest thing we can do. Juon's soft confession didn't fix everything, but it changed everything. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we might still find a way through the night. Months dragged on, stretching long and heavy like the thick fog that settled over the city each evening. The road ahead was anything but easy. Each step forward felt like wading through cold, murky water, the weight of uncertainty pulling me down. Yet somehow Juon and I found our way, inch by painstaking inch. I managed to land a part-time job. It wasn't glamorous or steady, but enough to keep the lights flickering weakly in our home and the cupboards from going completely bare. The first day at the new workplace was both a relief and a sharp reminder of how much had changed. The sterile buzz of the fluorescent lights, the echo of footsteps down endless hallways. I felt like a ghost moving through a world that no longer really belonged to me. But I pushed through the fatigue, the creeping self-doubt that whispered I wasn't enough, that I was too old, too broken to start over. Every rejection letter I'd received before only fueled this quiet fire inside me, urging me not to give in. At home, Juon and I began counseling, an unknown frontier that felt awkward and raw at first. Sitting opposite a stranger who probed gently and asked hard questions was nothing like the silent dinners or bottled-up convos we'd been sharing. It was painful learning how to talk without blaming, how to listen without shutting down. The sessions brought up years of unresolved tensions, fears, and hopes we had buried beneath daily survival. Yet, slowly, with each session, we rebuilt not just our words but the fragile foundation beneath our marriage. Losing my job had been devastating, like a tearing away of a part of my identity. But now I see that it forced me to rebuild, not just my career, but the relationship with Juon, and even the relationship I had with myself. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't pause for your struggles or give you a second chance to prepare. Sometimes it shatters you, strips you bare, and only then starts to piece you back together stronger and sharper. I remember nights when I lay awake, the ceiling above as dark and endless as my fears, wondering if we would survive this. But the love Juon and I shared, flawed, stretched to its limits, yet persistent, became the lifeline that held us steady through storms that threatened to swallow us whole. Our willingness to fight together, to admit weakness rather than hide from it, carried us through the darkest, loneliest hours. Looking back, I realized that being fired at the worst possible moment was also the moment I discovered just how much I, and we, were capable of. It pushed me to the edge and forced me to find strength I didn't know existed. That day marked not just an ending, but a beginning, a painful, terrifying rebirth. And though the scars remain, they are proof that even in our breaking, there is the possibility of healing, of growth, and of hope.